Hello, everyone. I'm Lupe Flores, Deputy Director of Communications and Outreach for the Future of California Elections. People are starting to log in, and I wanted to give everyone a few pointers on how to make this, this webinar a little more understandable for you. Voting in LA County's November general election, preparing the public. We initially had hoped to do a much more interactive type of webinar. We have now gotten over 200 registered attendees. So we've decided to modify this format a bit more. So I just want to let you know how it's going to work and let you know a little bit more about Future of California Elections, where our mission is to modernize elections and expand participation while serving the needs of all voters. We're a collaboration between officials, civil rights organizations, and election reform advocates. Many of them who are actually participating in this webinar today to examine the unique challenges we have coming this November. So here's one of the things you should know about the Zoom functions that you'll be able to access. You will have limited access to the chat feature. You will be able to see messages that we send out to you, but you will be unable to chat with other participants and panelists. When we have the panels, question and answer sessions, you will be able to access the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom application. You can type in your question there, and the moderators will attempt to get those questions answered if there's enough time. If we run out of time, we will attempt to get those questions answered as soon as possible. Thanks for your participation. We're looking forward to hearing from all of you afterwards, and hopefully foster new connections, networks, and collaborations. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Mindy Romero, and I direct the California Civic Engagement Project at the USC Price School of Public Policy. We are very excited to have so many folks joining us today for this really important event titled Voting in LA County's November General Election, Preparing the Public. And as you all know, it's brought to you by the Future of California Elections, as well as the USC California Civic Engagement Project. And very importantly, this event is put on in partnership with the LA County Elections Office. And we thank very much to Registrar Dean Logan, who is participating in the event, but today, and you'll hear from him just a little while ago, but of course, just overall for his partnership in putting on the event itself. So thank you. You should be able to see very shortly here in the chat function the agenda for the day, and you'll see we have a packed 2.5 hours. We're going to start off with our featured presentation, which is Registrar Logan himself. I will follow up with a brief data presentation releasing some new research on how voters may be choosing to vote in November. And then from there, we'll move into a panel presentation, which we're really excited to bring to you today. And hopefully you've seen the list of panelists. And then moving from there into a wider, broader network discussion, which we think will be a really rich conversation, even under our Zoom constraints. So, so thank you again, all of you for joining us. I'll say just a couple more brief words. If you're not familiar with the Future of California Elections, it is a nonpartisan network founded in late 2011 to address the unique challenges facing the state of California's election system through a cross-sector partnership model between nonprofits and election officials. And if you're not familiar with USC's California Civic Engagement Project, just in short, we're a research center at the USC Price School of Public Policy. And as our name suggests, we do research on voting behavior, civic engagement more broadly, do a lot of research around election reform, and our research, we try at least, wherever possible, to ground it very strongly in the work that is happening both on the side of election officials, but also with those that they partner with in communities and community advocates and voter rights groups and so forth. So our work is really aimed at informing all of those conversations. So thank you again. I'm going to turn it over to Lupe, my colleague at the Future of California Elections.
Panelist, Dean Logan, Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk for Los Angeles County, California. Mr. Logan has been a steadfast partner of the Future California elections for some time now. He's actually appeared at every one of our physical events, physical conferences in the past, and this is his first appearance in a virtual event. He is in charge of what is the largest, most diverse local election jurisdiction that serves 5.4 million registered voters. Aside from the election administration, they handle property documents, vital records, civil marriage ceremonies, and business filings. Approximately 3,500 customers a day. Mr. Logan holds a degree in organizational leadership from Azusa Pacific University and an executive MPA from the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. He is immediate past president of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials and a member of the board of directors for the National Elections Center. Additionally, he sits on the advisory boards for the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, Auburn University's Graduate Certificate in Election Administration, and the California State University Northridge Master of Public Administration program, where he also serves as a part-time instructor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Dean Logan.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Lupe, for that introduction, and thank you all for the time and the interest in participating in this event today. I want to start out by thanking Mindy and Astrid, both with the Future of California Elections and the California Civic Engagement Project, for their effort to collaborate, to provide this opportunity to have this discussion and the panels today, in spite of the uncertain conditions that we're all experiencing. I will share with you that they both reached out to me quite literally the week after the election to begin talking about how we could have this dialogue, and I think it's such an important opportunity. So I want to thank them for that. Thank all of you. I know there are many of you who partnered with us leading into the March election and the implementation of the Voting Solutions for All People project in Los Angeles County. I know on an individual and probably on a broader basis that you have had questions and concerns about some of what happened in March, and since then, what's going to happen leading into November? Because obviously things, a lot happened on March 3rd, but a lot happened that week after, and things changed dramatically. And so that has limited our ability to have direct dialogue with many of you. So I've looked forward to this opportunity. And while it still may be limited today, I hope that this kicks off a continuing conversation and partnership with all of you as we lead into November. So let me open up a slide presentation. Just real quickly, let me just start by reviewing kind of where we've come from and where we are in LA County. I think everybody probably is familiar with the fact that we launched a new voting experience in Los Angeles County in March based on the Voting Solutions for All People initiative, which has been a decade-long effort to reimagine not just the technology and systems that are used to conduct elections in California, or I'm sorry, in Los Angeles, but also to look at this through the lens of the voter and to create a new voting experience. As we went through that process and that project, it evolved, the regulatory environment changed as well. So our prior system, which was at the end of its life cycle, also became decertified based on the security concerns over the last decade around voting systems and the need for modernization in general of voting systems, and the changes in California state law and the need for our systems and infrastructure in Los Angeles County to accommodate the policy changes that had taken place in California. So compliance with the VoteCal statewide database, changes in allowing for the vote center environment, the conditional voter registration laws, those types of things that were not particularly compatible or conducive in our prior system. So just a quick overview. LA County did adopt the Voters' Choice Act model in March. We did that based on a particular formula that was adopted in the law for Los Angeles County. So we were a little bit of a hybrid compared to the other VCA counties in California. but some of the main components were still in place. So we did have 10 days of voting before Election Day at vote centers where voters in the county could go to any voting location to cast their ballot. We did expand vote by mail in LA County. We mailed ballots to approximately 63% of the voters in Los Angeles County. And then at the vote centers, we launched the use of our new ballot marking devices, accessible voting technology, and the e-poll books, which are the tools that enable us to have the vote centers where people can vote at any location, but also meets important needs for Los Angeles County voters, such as language assistance, accessibility, and conditional voter registration. So that's just a little bit of background. I know that's familiar to everybody here. So what did we learn? Obviously, as I mentioned, and want to be real up front, we know that there were issues and there were problems with the rollout of this model in the March election. And we have good data to show that, and that's data we didn't have before. So it actually gives us a broad spectrum of information that we can use to ensure that those issues don't reoccur and to fine-tune the process going forward. So let me just share a little bit of that data. And this is data that's included in a report back that we did to the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors that can be made available to anyone who has interest. But here's some of what we learned in the process. We had nearly 1 million voters cast a vote at a vote center during the March election in Los Angeles County, but only 27% of those voters voted during that 10-day early voting period, which was lower than what we had projected or anticipated. So we had 73% of our in-person voters go to vote centers on election day itself. So that led to capacity issues depending on the size of the vote center. That we definitely need to look at addressing. We had about 1.4 million, or I'm sorry, 1.14 million of our voters who cast ballots in the election through our vote by mail process. Interestingly enough, to kind of flip back to the earlier part, of those 73% who voted on election day, 450,000 of those were voters who also had been mailed a vote by mail ballot. So that's interesting data to look at. We've sort of tried to dissect that from a number of spectrums, and of course things are going to be different in November given the public health situation that we're dealing with going forward. I think some of that had to do with the fact that this was a presidential primary and the dynamics of the candidates were changing leading up to election day, but it's certainly an indication to us, and I know to many people who are participating today, that even as we expand vote by mail and look to vote by mail as that fail-safe method for conducting an election in a pandemic environment, or hopefully a post-pandemic environment, the need in LA County for robust and accessible in-person voting experiences is still a primary concern, and something that we need to ensure that we provide that going forward. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. We did do a post-election survey on our own. We sent an email survey to about 27,000 voters who participated in the election. On the positive side, 70% of the respondents to that survey indicated that they did have a positive voting experience in Los Angeles County. Unfortunately, 20% indicated that they had a negative voting experience in LA County. That's probably the more important number for us because we need to focus on that. Obviously not an acceptable number, and raises concerns. A subset of that, 15% of the people who were surveyed indicated that they experienced excessive waiting times voting, and that was particularly, obviously, the voters who went to vote in person. In addition to that, Loyola Marymount conducted an exit poll survey, really good data there, with some really granular information from voters about their voting experience that will help us in improving. And then the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles County, through a motion the week after the election, took two steps that were important to demonstrating the county's commitment to addressing these issues going forward. One of those things was to have the department under my direction to prepare a post-election report that got into specific issues, and I'll summarize some of those in this presentation. But in addition to that, we have worked, the county has worked with an independent third-party organization to look at at our report and to validate our recommendations, but also to offer any additional recommendations that they may have. So there is some independence and oversight of that and of the data. And that process has been going constantly since right after the election. So we have a lot of good information and a lot of good direction. I think that the good news is all of that seems to be aligning. I think that the direction is clear, the needs and the issues that need to be addressed are clear, and there is a path forward in that regard. So what are those post-election key findings? So in our report to the board, we identified 47 specific actions or changes that needed to take place looking ahead to the November election. I should add that another part of the board's motion was in addition to the retroactive look at the March election, there was also a mandate to look forward at that time to the November election and to present a feasibility study for expanding to the full Voters' Choice Act model under California law, which includes mailing a ballot to every registered voter in Los Angeles County. That was a week or so ahead of when things started to change under the pandemic, so we had a little bit of a head start on that, and that led to the adoption of our board on April 28th of that model. So we do know for sure, and again, I'll talk more about this in a minute, that LA County will be mailing a ballot to every registered voter in the November election and in all subsequent elections going forward in LA County. So I'm going to cover 7 kind of key areas. I think they're the ones that are probably most relevant and most familiar. There's a lot of sub-issues in these, but for purposes of this presentation, I think these are really the most important ones. First and foremost, we know that there were excessive wait times on March 3rd, and those issues were related to technical issues with the systems that we had in place. Primarily those issues related to the electronic poll books that were used to check in voters. There were other issues associated with the size and capacity of the vote centers that we had secured for the election. Again, related to the poll pads, there was a usability feature for the election workers that they used to do the check-in of voters that was not streamlined and was not functioning the way it was intended to function. And then the impacts of conditional voter registration had a direct impact on excessive wait times as well, because those transactions took longer to process. On the solution side, a number of steps we're taking. We are working directly with the manufacturer and the vendor that provides the electronic poll books, known as the poll pad, to modify their software to speed up the synchronization process that allows us to have near real-time updates. That's what provides the security of allowing a voter to go to any vote center, but also to ensure that people are only voting once in the election. We learned a lot in that process and in our post-election analysis on ways to streamline that process. We're also going to make sure that there's a minimum of 5 poll pads that are deployed and connected and up and operating at all times. One of the things that we learned in the process in March is that in the early days of voting, where the volume was lower, sometimes those devices weren't turned on, and if they weren't turned on each day, then when they were powered up, it took longer to synchronize the data from the prior days of the election. So we want to be sure that those are all across the board, are all being synchronized on the same schedule. We're adding new search filters that will allow the check-in process to go more quickly and make it easier for voters to check in. And then we'll be doing additional training for our election workers to streamline conditional voter registration, but also to encourage voters to take advantage of tools such as using the barcode that's on their sample ballot to automatically check in at the vote center. So those are just a handful of issues that we're doing to address wait times. What's not listed here on this screen, but I want to emphasize, is we're also working with a number of different partners, including Caltech, on ways to measure wait times and to make that available to voters on a real-time basis. So a voter deciding to go to a vote center would actually have access to some data to indicate what the projected wait time or volume of people who might be at that particular vote center, and also to identify which vote centers have fewer people or a shorter wait period. Staffing at vote centers is another issue that we looked at very closely. We because of the compression leading into the election, our systems were not on par with what they needed to be for effectively managing the data, making sure that we had adequate staffing levels at vote centers, tracking who actually showed up to be at the vote centers, whether they had been trained, a number of just different logistical issues around that. That was also impacted by a delay in the finalizing and securing all of the vote centers for the election, and the size and allocation of those vote centers led to some places where we had understaffing and other places where we had overstaffing. So we need to be able to balance that, do load balancing on that, and make sure that we have a better tracking system for that. There were also some delays in getting information out to those election workers, and those are all being addressed through implementation of a new data management tool that is built and customized around election worker assignments and the model of vote centers that we're deploying in Los Angeles County. We're starting the vote center and election worker recruitment processes much earlier going into November. At the same time, though, we recognize that has probably become even more challenging given the pandemic conditions, where it will be more challenging to get agreement for facilities to open their doors for us to have a vote center, as well as election workers who may be a little more hesitant to work over a period of time given the pandemic conditions. So it's going to be important that we get a jump start on that, and that we develop more innovative programs to look at how we staff them and how we build those partnerships to get the vote centers. And we're in the process of doing those things right now. Election worker training, obviously a priority issue always in elections administration, and that certainly was the case here. We dealt with issues in March where the content of the training was changing on a real-time basis as we were leading up to the election, given the volume of people that needed to be trained, and the fact that some things were still developing in the procedures and even in legislation regarding how to handle conditional voter registration transactions leading up to literally the week before the election. And as a result of that, we had election workers who were recruited late in the process, maybe had not had complete training, and were not well versed on the use of the poll pad that led to some of the issues that we talked about. And as I mentioned, the conditional voter registration processes were not particularly well understood because we had some people who had been trained early in the process, but then the legislation changed leading up to the election. So there was some conflict and miscommunication around that. So streamlining those processes, finalizing the training on an earlier basis, building in some more robust analysis and evaluation of those trainings so we have a better handle on how well the procedures were comprehended, offering more hands-on training, in particular on the poll pads and the check-in process, and looking at what's the appropriate length and duration of that training and how can we augment that through our online election worker training program as well. Vote center setup and deployment. This relates back to my prior comments about the delay in securing the vote centers, which had a direct effect. But we also learned through this process that given the size and complexity of Los Angeles County, our internal staff within the county, even with the assistance of many other county departments, really doesn't have the skill set or the capacity to do the deployment and setup of those vote centers given the time frame that is required. We built that system or we modeled that system around an assumption that we would have access to these vote center locations well in advance of the first day of voting and for an extended period of time after Election Day to do setup, deployment, and also breakdown. The reality is that the types of places that are best positioned to serve as functional vote centers with the capacity that we need on Election Day are obviously locations where those facilities are in high demand. And so it's very difficult to negotiate that lead time and that time after the election. So to compensate for that, we are going to contract out or outsource the deployment and setup of the vote centers that will allow a higher capacity to do that in a shorter period of time before Election Day, and to break that down and get the equipment out of those locations after Election Day much faster than we were able to do in the primary. And that will also free up our staff to do the operations and to build the capacity for those things where we do have the critical skill sets and knowledge to support the election. Help desk call center for election workers and voters. This is another area where essentially a capacity issue, that a combination of a capacity issue and technology. We had a number of different call centers and help desks that were deployed or employed during the election, but they were disparate. So calls could come into any number of those places, and the nature of the call may not get to the subject matter expert that could help address that. So we're going to consolidate those so that the voter-facing call centers are all going into one system and tracked on a more streamlined basis. The calls coming in from election workers will go to a direct location, and then for our technical support, we're going to, again, outsource that to a third party that will not do the technical support, but that will log those calls and handle the dispatch of the field tech supports that will be out in the community and able to more quickly address the issues at the vote centers. We're also going to expand the number of field tech supports to at least a ratio of 1 tech support to every 2 vote centers, possibly even 1 to 1. We're doing an analysis of that right now. Ballot marking devices. This is one that we heard quite a bit about on Election Day and post-Election Day. The data shows that while there were issues with a number of ballot marking devices, most of those issues related to an identified faulty printer gear that occurred in a subset of the manufacturing process. So it didn't affect all units. It affected units that were manufactured on a particular thread or a number of days. That's been addressed. That's been corrected, and we also are adding a new firmware to the devices that prevents or greatly decreases the likelihood of ballot jams on the entrance point when the voter first puts their blank ballot into the device. That is in testing and certification now, and we'll go through volume testing, so we have a high level of confidence that addresses that issue. But beyond that issue, the ballot marking devices, based on the data that we got back from voters and actually looking at the logs, actually performed fairly effectively at the vote centers, and voters indicated that once they were able to get to the ballot marking device and utilize it to mark their ballot, that they were very comfortable and pleased with the features of those devices. So a lot of that, I think, has to do with again getting things right on the front end. There was certainly a perception issue. You saw in the news rooms full of these devices where they were sitting idle, and a lot of that related back to the backlog that we had in the check-in process, and that of course will be addressed going forward. One of the things we'll have to look at now in the COVID-19 environment is recruiting vote centers that have a larger footprint so that we can provide more physical distancing between the devices and ensure that we maintain the guidance from public health in that process as well. So in addition to analyzing and thinking about what are the right number of vote centers to have during the 10-day voting period and the 4-day voting period, is also the characteristics of those vote centers. What is the size, the capacity, and the geography of where those are deployed? So all of that is part of our current project plan. Final one I'll mention, and I think this was more of a transition or change in voting culture. There were issues raised about confusion from voters who did not understand that when you vote on the ballot marking device that you complete that voting process on the device, and that the voted ballot actually goes back into the secure ballot box that's attached to that device, rather than taking it back to a communal ballot box, which is what voters were accustomed to under the prior system. We are looking at a number of different ways to to increase the visibility and the awareness of that process so that voters aren't confused by that, but also to emphasize the security and the usability features that are associated with having that ballot box on the ballot marking device. And that, again, relates back to the accessibility and privacy issues. And that was designed that way intentionally. So what we need to work on is the messaging, both when the voter goes through the check-in process, so they're oriented to that, but also the on-screen messaging to let them know what happens next in the process and to help them work through that. So that's a summary, very high-level summary. Again, just a snapshot of over 47 specific actions or recommendations that we identified in our process, and we didn't do that in a vacuum. We did that with a lot of engagement with voters, election workers who worked in March, our stakeholder community, and again, a third-party validation of those recommendations, and that work is well underway as we move forward. So on top of that, as I mentioned at the beginning, the other thing that has changed since then is that we presented to the Board of Supervisors an implementation plan and a feasibility study of expanding vote by mail for the November general election, so that every voter in LA County will receive a vote by mail ballot. Again, the Board of Supervisors adopted that plan on April 28th, a week before the governor's executive order. So we had a little bit of a head start on that, and we are moving forward with that implementation plan as well. But again, recognizing, and this is an area where we're still doing analysis and still looking for direction, and ultimately will arrive at what is the minimum threshold and ratio for the number of vote centers for LA County. We know that that's a dialogue that's going on statewide. We know there's been some work coming out of the Secretary of State's working group on that. We know that there's a dialogue going on in Sacramento in the legislature about that minimum. I think it's clear to us in LA County that the minimum is not going to be an acceptable number in Los Angeles County. What we deployed in March was well above the minimum that we were required to have in March, and we still had issues. So again, that's more than just the numbers game. It's also the types of locations and the way in which we engage and educate the public about that. But I think it's, again, important. There's been some confusion in some meetings I've gone to, and even in media reports that indicate that the move to mail everybody a ballot in Los Angeles County will mean a drastic reduction in-person voting options. We do not anticipate that. We think there will be a shift, but there will still be significant options for voters to vote in person in LA County for those voters who need or desire to do that. Again, recognizing that we have to do that in alignment with public health guidelines. The good news is we've had an opportunity to do that on a smaller scale. We had municipal elections in 2 cities in April. We had the congressional district special election in the 25th congressional district just last week. In both of those elections, we did offer voting experiences at mobile and pop-up vote centers that were in those cases, external facilities where we were able to allow for social distancing, to take the appropriate steps to make sure that we provided access and opportunity for voters to vote in person, but that we also protected the safety of our election workers and voters alike in that process. So this is just a quick snapshot of what that is going to look like in the November election. Again, we'll be mailing ballots to every registered voter. That's an increase of 2.5 million, projected increase of about 2.5 million vote by mail ballots above what we issued in the March election. So to put that into perspective, in Los Angeles County, that's the equivalent of layering on the full electorate of a San Diego County or an Orange County on top of the 63% that we already had mail ballots to in March. So that's a significant undertaking. It will be the largest. We already were the largest vote by mail operation in the country in a single jurisdiction, and now we're increasing that substantially. So we're working very closely with vendors, our providers. We're literally looking for additional space so that we can do that in a very open and transparent way. I think we're all aware of the dialogue nationally around vote by mail and dealing with the misinformation or lack of information that is out there. We're going to need to combat that and ensure that our voters are comfortable with the processes that take place, and that we give them the confidence that that vote by mail ballot is the fail-safe method to ensure that even in a condition such as a pandemic, that every voter in LA County will have the opportunity to vote. Some of that includes, given our electorate, doing some early outreach to voters, so that if voters want to request that ballot come to them in a language other than English. We have 13 required languages in Los Angeles. We want to be sure that we get that information out and we give them the opportunity to apply for that early on. So it's not a matter of them getting the ballot in English and then having to go through a process of requesting a replacement ballot. So we'll be doing a lot of work around that in the early months of the summer, including mirroring that with a list maintenance process to ensure that we have good addresses for every voter that are recognized by the Postal Service, those types of critical pieces that are associated with vote by mail. At the vote centers, we will be designing this around a safe in-person vote center that allows us to comply with whatever the state and county guidelines are from public health officials at the time of the November election. We do still plan at this point to offer voting beginning 10 days before the election, and then to expand that during the final 4 days of the election under the model of the VCA. We recognize there may be some modification to that by executive order or by legislation, and again, we'll continue to work through that, but at this stage, we are planning based on the VCA model. We will also be expanding the number of vote by mail drop boxes that are available in the county, and in particular emphasizing the permanent 24-hour, 7-day-a-week boxes that are available out in the community, so voters don't have to go into a building or into a place where other people are gathered in order to drop off their vote by mail ballot. A couple of things just to re-emphasize the steps that we're taking in terms of the public health conditions, and these are things that, again, we did during the April and May elections. We'll do again in the June 2nd special election coming up. We are requiring that voters, based on the public health order, wear a clean face covering when they visit a vote center. We do provide disposable face coverings, a supply of those at the vote center, so if people do arrive and they don't have a face covering, we can provide that if needed. All of our election workers will be wearing personal protective equipment, gloves, and face coverings. We will be enforcing social distancing. So we actually mark off the space using cones and tape to ensure that we maintain that social distancing. And all of our equipment is sanitized after each voter transaction. So that's the ballot marking devices, but it's also the check-in equipment, the stylus that's used, and we also provide, if somebody requests to use gloves in the process of marking their ballot, we will have a supply of those as well. This is an area where we recognize there's ongoing development with the public health orders, and there's ongoing guidance coming across the country from people who are looking at how best to offer voting in a safe and secure manner under these conditions. So we will be agile and adaptable to additional guidance in this respect as well. So what does this look like timeline? I wish that we could say that we had a longer on-ramp to the election than we had in March, but given the significant change that now we're layering on top of the change that we already undertook in March, this is still a very aggressive and constrained time frame. We need to be ready by September 24th to mail sample ballots to all of our voters, and our goal is to have vote centers secured and scheduled at that time so that information can be included in the sample ballots. By October 5th, all of those vote by mail ballots need to go in the mail to all of our voters, and that means that we also need to have our vote by mail drop boxes open and ready to take voted ballots. And that will also represent the first day that early voting is available in person, at least at our headquarters facility. And then the official voter registration deadline is October 19th. We know with conditional voter registration that people can continue to register or change their registration after that date. But in a vote by mail environment, that will represent the cutoff by which somebody registers or changes their registration and gets a vote-by-mail ballot under the vote-by-mail model. After that, any change or new registration will need to take place at a vote center. The 10-day vote centers would open on October 24th, and then we would open the remaining locations during that final 4 days leading up to Election Day, where of course they would be open during traditional polling hours from 7 a.m. To 8 p.m. Embedded in all of this, there is no question that the success of this depends on a functional and effective media and outreach education campaign. That was part of our post-election analysis. While we did have a high-profile media and outreach campaign heading into the March election, it is also clear that this is a topic that, at least in the March environment, it was hard to really capture the attention of voters until they were ready to go cast their ballots. So that may look a little different heading into a presidential general election, but we don't want to hedge our bets on that. We want to work with media partners to ensure that we have the right messaging, that it is targeted to particular communities. So whatever the effective venue or medium of outreach and education for a particular community or a particular population is represented in that broader campaign plan that we're looking at. So that will include everything ranging from direct mailings to all registered voters in the county, to email and social media campaigns, television, radio, digital advertising, neighborhood, neighbor-to-neighbor type of communications, and significant investment in working with our multilingual, community-based media partners here in Los Angeles County. But we know we can't do that alone. That even with significant resources made available, which of course the competition is even higher for those resources given the economic impacts of the pandemic, we know that the partnerships with community organizations, CBOs, and even the campaigns and candidates who are involved in this election are going to be critical parts of that as well. And we will be stepping up our partnership activities and ensuring that we share information in a way that it can and be moved well beyond just the reach of our office. So with that, I will stop. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Again, I just want to thank everyone for their interest. I know that these are uncertain times, that everything changed right after the March election. I want you to know that the team here in Los Angeles County has been heads down, looking very closely at what happened in March, the things that didn't go well, but also really looking at those parts of the process that did go well, so that we can expand on those things. And so I will just mention in closing that one of the things that was a little bit under the radar in March, but that I think was particularly effective and is going to be very important in this COVID-19 environment heading into November, is our mobile and what we call flex vote centers, where during that 10-day early voting period, in addition to our fixed vote centers, we had mobile units and what we call pop-up locations that we took out into the community, where we knew that there were populations that were harder to serve, or that would have more difficulty accessing the fixed locations. That really proved to be a very successful model, and one that was embraced by voters. And I know we have our partners from AltaMed who are on a panel later today. They were particularly pivotal in the success of that, what I would call a pilot project in the March election. So we are going to expand on that, recognizing that with the pandemic conditions, people are going to be hesitant about where they go and what type of large size gatherings might be happening in the community. So we want to look at things like, if people are going for other public services to a particular physical location, if we can co-locate a mobile vote center at that location, so that when they're already going out to get services that they need and their communities in need, that they also will have the opportunity to take advantage of going in and casting their ballots at that time as well. So we're excited about expanding that. We think it's going to be an important component to the kind of the safe and secure element of the November election and moving forward. So again, thank you all, and I'm look forward to taking your questions. If we don't get to all of them today, I'll work closely with Astrid and Mindy to get a full listing of those. And if we can provide additional feedback, we're happy to do that.
Great, and thanks, Dean. We do have a lot of questions, and thank you so much for your presentation. And we asked a lot of Dean today. We asked him to cover March and then to also share with us what's going to be happening and what are the voting options for November. And so wanted to thank you, Dean, for getting through all of that. We do have a lot of questions, and we will certainly follow up to the ones we don't get to answer. So let me jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Astrid Ochoa. I'm the Executive Director of Future of California Elections, and thank you for joining us today. So I have lots of questions, so I grouped a couple of them. And so some of the questions here are around recruiting election workers, recognizing that our traditional election workers are in the at-risk category. How do we, what strategies are you using to implement and recruit election workers for this fall?
Yeah, great question, and one that's very much on our mind. Of course, looking at the demographics of our traditional election workers coming from, there are different categories of election workers. So we primarily have three broad categories of people who have served us as election workers in LA County. We have our community poll worker model. So that's sort of the traditional model that is best known throughout the state and throughout the country for working at polls. But we also have a very robust agreement within county government where county employees are deployed to work as election workers. And we also have a fairly effective student poll worker program that we want to expand on. So we're looking at all three of those things. I think you're right, Astrid, and in the question that in the community election worker category, the demographics of that, especially when we're looking for people who are going to work for multiple days, tends to skew towards the more vulnerable population under the public health orders, and we're going to have to address that to the best of our ability. So I think the way we do that is through partnerships, looking creatively at not just the same tried and true recruitment methods of cold calling or taking referrals, but actually partnering with organizations and looking at models where a particular organization, maybe it's a CBO, maybe it's we had a past example where law students from LMU did this. They actually take responsibility and become ambassadors for a particular vote center site and provide the staffing for that. We're going to be looking closely and watching what happens with our higher education and our school systems. If our universities and colleges and community colleges are still in an online learning environment in the fall, that may be an opportunity for us to capitalize on some unique partnerships to get some of those students to come out and to participate in this process. There's also discussion. The California Association of Clerks and Election Officials is encouraging the legislature to look at closing public schools and public universities and colleges during that final 4 days, that Friday before the election through Tuesday, and to encourage those public employees to become partners in working at election centers or voting centers in California. So we're at the table in those discussions as well.
Great, and to your point, Dean, you were sharing the importance of partnerships, and there are many partners in LA County. What are some ways that you are using to connect and hear from voters, from former poll workers? I know I've talked to your staff of some of the outreach and survey work that you have done. Can you go ahead and let us know kind of how you're connecting with folks to get that input and to identify those partnerships?
Sure. I mean, it's very important to do that, and it's been challenging to do that because of the Safer at Home initiative. So initially, what we've done is, and you heard in my presentation, some very high-level statistics from our survey of voters. We did similarly. We did surveys of election workers, so the people who worked as leads at vote centers, as well as the broader spectrum of election workers. So we have that data. We're compiling that. And there's a lot of good information in that. That's not enough. We know that we're going to have to continue to look at, really dig into the data. For instance, we'll be looking at things like where were the voters who voted in person likely to go? Did they go to the place closest to their home, or did they go further away from home? And what can we discern from that? And how can we get more information about that? which were the types of vote centers that that became log jammed because they were physically smaller, but they obviously were more appealing to a larger group of population. I think that's something we're looking closely at. Where did voters where did they experience discomfort with the type of vote center? And so looking at areas, again, where even in a vote by mail environment where we're mailing everybody a vote by mail ballot, we know that there are areas of Los Angeles County geographic communities as well as demographic communities where there is a trust gap with the Postal Service, and there's a trust gap with confidence in voting by mail. And so we need to analyze that and be sure that we have even more robust in-person services in those areas so that we compensate for that trust gap and try to bridge that. So that's done through data analysis, but it's also going to be, again, I don't want to overuse the word, but it's so true, through partnerships of getting into those neighborhoods and communities and talking to the people who are working on a day-to-day basis in those communities, who can give us guidance on how best we can address those gaps and ensure that we meet those needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now you made some references to voter behavior and where and when people choose to vote. And we know that when any jurisdiction has transitioned to a vote center model, the voting behavior shows, as you indicated in your presentation, that most people still show up on election day. So what are strategies that you all are considering to encourage either early voting or strategies to accommodate the fact that we know that people still show up on election day?
Yeah, I think all of the above on that. I think we have to look at all of those things. As I mentioned, I think some of the dynamics will be different in November than they were in March. Because there is at least some level of increased knowledge now about the early voting process. We won't have the dynamic of the late changes in the candidate pool leading up to Election Day. And we now have this environment where at least a certain segment of our population, I think, are going to embrace that that spreading of the curve, right? So they're not going to want to wait and go at a time where they think there are going to be lots and lots of people. But I don't think we can count on that. I think what we know, even from these smaller special elections that have taken place here in LA County as well as in other counties in the state, we know that from a campaign perspective, as you get closer to Election Day, the campaigns are going to continue to adapt their outreach campaigns, and literally on Election Day, I expect that the campaigns are going to, based on their data, their polling, are going to be driving people to get out and vote in those in-person voting locations. So we have to build the capacity for that. We have to have an environment that's scalable to that. And so some of that are the things I talked about earlier about how we measure wait times, the size and capacity of the vote centers being as important, if not more important, than the actual number of vote centers. And that needs to be part of our voter outreach and education campaign. We need to be more direct and more emphatic about informing voters that we're open and letting them know what percentage of voters have already participated, how many people have already returned a ballot by mail, how many people have voted in person, and what does that look like as you ramp up to Election Day? What does that mean if you're waiting and you're in that pool of people who haven't yet participated? What is that going to mean for you, and how can you anticipate and plan for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you started to go into it a bit in your presentation, but really, could you expand a bit about what it would look like to vote in person in November? What are going to be the PPE requirements, the personal protection equipment for election workers and for people coming in? We got a couple of questions there that people really would like to kind of understand what that might look like for November.
Yes, so the model that we have employed in these special elections, and we have worked directly with the guidance of our Department of Public Health on this. So we're trying to make sure that the steps we take are both in alignment with the public health guidelines, but also recognize just the perceptions and the personal comfort level or to try and ramp down the anxiety of voters who might be in these locations. So a lot of it is the same thing that we're all dealing with, right? The same tips that we're hearing, and that is encouraging and making sure that people are wearing face coverings, making sure that we provide for the physical distancing, so that if there is a line, even if it's just a handful of people, that we're spacing those people out, and that the voting equipment is laid out in a manner that provides for that social distancing as well. Perhaps most important is demonstrating the cleanliness of the environment, the fact that we're disinfecting the devices after each use, that every hour throughout the day we are doing a full cleaning of the check-in environment, and posting that so people can see that that's not just something we talk about, but that there's a checklist so people can see that that's happened, and they can have the confidence that has occurred. I think that the challenge again that we're going to continue to face is what are the best locations that will facilitate those kind of provisions. So we're going to be, we've had the advantage in these smaller elections of being able to primarily use external locations where we had our mobile units, and literally we were in large parking lots, and so there was open air environment, so people could be well spaced out. That's the type of thing that we're going to have to look at closely. If we're looking at some range of 500 to 700 in-person vote centers, obviously some of those are going to be in facilities where people have to, go through corridors, or have to, go in multiple rooms, and that's where we're gonna have to look for those larger capacity facilities. That's a place where we hope that we can take advantage of the fact, at least for November, that our colleges and universities are going to be on an online environment, and hopefully that means that those are going to be prime locations that we can take advantage of and use going forward.
Yeah. And Dean, I know that we've gotten a couple of questions around the expansion of vote by mail, and the governor's executive order. The Board of Supervisors adopted this vote center model, so every voter will get a vote by mail. And so why are you still doing in-person voting? I know it's something that our organization and our partners do believe in, but I think it's important for people to understand the why.
Yeah, so I think there are a number of reasons. One is, and I feel very strongly about this. I think that we're in an environment where relying on a single mode of voting is just it's too high risk. I mean, we're hearing daily. I mean, all of the same things that government and private industry are dealing with in this pandemic environment. Have a subset impact on elections. So you're hearing about the economic issues with the Postal Service, the changes in leadership at the Postal Service. And I don't share that to scare anybody, because I do have confidence that the Postal Service will be a good partner and will help ensure that these vote by mail ballots serve as the fail-safe method that they need to in this environment. But I don't think we can put all of our eggs in that basket. We know just from the data that there are locations and there are populations in Los Angeles County that are unlikely to receive their mail, or who just don't have confidence in that. We know that from an accessibility standpoint, even though we have remote accessible vote by mail services that allow a voter with a disability to use a vote by mail ballot, we know that there are other conditions or situations where the accessible voting location in person is just a better voting experience for those voters, and we need to meet that. We know in this county, with 13 required languages and a number of additional languages that aren't even required, that then inevitably there are going to be voters who didn't know or didn't request a ballot in their preferred language, who are going to be better served by going to an in-person vote center where they can use a ballot marking device that allows them to listen to the ballot in a preferred language and to view it in a preferred language. So those are our prime examples. I think the other thing that I would just point back to again is the data. We know that 450,000 of the voters who showed up and voted in person in March were mailed a vote by mail ballot. So that is an indication that there's a preference on the part of voters. Now, will that be different based on the pandemic conditions? I don't know. There isn't data to show how elections work in a pandemic, but I don't think we should superimpose our assumption that voters are not going to show up. We know, again, in these smaller elections, there have still been voters who showed up and voted in person. The conditional voter registration law, which is of high interest in California to ensure that nobody is left without the opportunity to register and participate in the election, that depends on in-person voting options. Because if you're not registered, you're not going to get that vote by mail ballot. So we have to ensure that access still exists.
Great, thank you, Dean. And just one question to close us out. And again, thank you for joining us. We know your schedule's tight. We had 30 plus questions come in, so we'll make sure to get those to your office to make sure that folks get answers to them. So just to close this up, I know that there is interest from partners to support your office, either helping to identify vote centers, to help recruit election workers. What's the best way for people to connect with your office directly?
Sure, no, and we welcome that participation in that partnership. I think that the best way is probably to do that through existing networks. So if your organization is already connected with the VCA LA group or with the future California elections, that's a good way. I know Astrid, I can guarantee you that Astrid will share that information with us, and we'll continue to partner through that. But simply contacting me, I can put you in touch with our Government and Legislative Affairs division that monitors our outreach and education programs. And I would really say, think broadly about this and think creatively. What is the part of this where you or your organization can best contribute or can best inform us of information that we need to be successful in November? So yes, it's vote center recruitment. Yes, it's election center or voting center recruitment and selection, but it's also things about letting us know where there are people participating today who are much more knowledgeable about where those pockets are in our community, where there are those trust gaps, or where there are those unique situations where we have pockets of people who might have a particular language need, or who understand the intricacies of how public transit works for voters with accessibility needs. That's the kind of information and data that we need. And we need that early to ensure that we plan ahead for that.
Thanks again, Dean, for taking time to join us today. We look forward to our continued partnership, and we will be posting the recording online as well, make it available to folks at the end. So appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thank you and Mindy again for reaching out right away and helping to put this together, and for persevering through the conditions. I mean, it's amazing that you're able to put this together and we can have this many people participating. That bodes well for where we're heading towards November. So thank you.
Yeah, we all have the shared goal right now. So thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn off our videos, and we'll pass it over to Mindy to continue the program.
Thank you very much. And make sure that I'm unmuted. And I just want to say a personal thank you to Registrar Logan, to Dean for again participating in this and giving such a thorough overview of what happened in the primary, and most importantly, where we're going forward. So we really greatly value this partnership today. So thank you. I'm going to jump in now and talk about some data. So a brand new study that I released with some partners at UC San Diego and UC Riverside. So the study itself, it's up on the screen now, is actually, what I'm going to present today is actually highlights from a report that we're releasing to coincide with this event today. So you can, in a little while, we'll put it in the chat, you can visit a website for thenewelectorate.org, and you can download the report that I'm going to provide highlights for, and welcome any questions once you view that. If you want to connect with me individually today, because of time, I'll just cover a little bit of that report. The title is How Do Californians Want to Cast Their Ballots During the COVID-19 Crises? And my colleagues, so this is not a CCP or California Civic Engagement report. This is actually a report under a project called the New Electorate Study, with my colleagues at UC San Diego, specifically Thad Kauser, Mackenzie Lockhart, Seth Hill, Jennifer Marola of UC Riverside, and then of course myself. I'm just positioning things on the screen so I can see them a little bit better. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit about our research approach. This is a very large sample. It's a representative survey, statewide survey of California eligible voters. So those are adult citizens. It was conducted online, but with a large enough sample to be representative by the state's largest racial and ethnic groups. It also allows us to delve into specific counties, in particular LA. And our goal really here is to understand, right, from this survey, public opinion around November election. So a number of sub areas that we talk about. So first and foremost, what method of voting do they at this point expect to be engaging in, by mail, in person, by dropping off a mail ballot and so forth. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Their opinions around what method makes them feel more comfortable, what method makes them feel more confident that their ballot will be cast or actually counted. We ask about their preferences around and their comfort level around waiting in line at polling places, being a potential poll worker at a polling place or vote center. And we also ask them about some specific policy questions that are in play in California and nationally. So as I said, I'll get to some of that and highlight some of that today. It's a survey that was very recently fielded, April 8th through the 22nd. And what I'm going to talk about on the next slide here is just to say that all of these sub-areas, all these subtopics that we talked about, we also employed in an experimental treatment. So we wanted to understand, under the environment of COVID, how that could be impacting people's opinions on all of those sub-areas. So what we did is we randomly divided that very large 12,000 or so plus sample group into 3 groups. So we presented 2 of these groups with truthful summaries of the projections of 2 widely cited teams of scientists. One team projecting a peak of the public health crisis in the spring of 2020, so now. And another team projecting that its impact will peak in the fall. And these are common models from the University of Washington and the Imperial College of London, which many folks have heard. And then a third group didn't get any projections from us at all. So we didn't specifically highlight COVID. We asked these questions of them without presenting a scenario specific to COVID, if that makes sense. Next slide. I won't, for time, talk about these or read these specifically, but I want you to know that we did provide some good amount of detail around these 2 scenarios. And of course, if you read our report, we talk in great length around our methodology specific to these scenarios. Next slide. So how do Californians want to cast their own ballots in November? So just over half, 51.7%, said that they would prefer to vote by mailing in their ballot specifically. And the choices we gave them were mailing in their vote by mail ballot that's automatically sent to them. And of course, now we know that all ballots will be automatically sent, or sorry, mail ballots will be automatically sent to all voters in California. So 51% said that. We also gave them options though, with regard to not just mailing it, but do they prefer to drop off that vote by mail ballot at a drop box, or do they want to vote in person, either at a vote center or at an in-person traditional polling place? So another about 19% said that the most important option for them, their preference, was dropping off their vote by mail ballot at a drop box. And then at the same time, about 30% said that they wanted to vote in person at a voting site, whether it was a polling place or a vote center. Next slide, please. So I'm going to get into the treatments, experimental treatments, just a little bit here, and then I'll defer you to the paper for the rest of it. So breaking out that 51.7% that I said of all respondents who wanted to specifically send their ballot through the mail, that was the option that they preferred. It was a little different depending on the treatment that they got, the different scenarios that they got. So it was a little bit higher for those people that read the projections around the fall peak, that COVID would peak in the fall around election time. So that was 53.4%. It was about the same for folks that read the projections that it was going to peak in the spring now. And their preference was a little bit lower, right? A smaller number, a smaller percentage of respondents said they preferred to send their ballot through the mail. Those that didn't get any sort of projection, reminder, asked about COVID in that sense. Next slide. So I'm going to move away from the experimental treatments because in a very short presentation, it's hard to get into all of those details, but I just want you to know that all of this that I'm going to present going forward is for all respondents, regardless of what treatment they got. But if you want to see some of those differences, go to our report and we talk about it there. So now we do understand that there are preferences, there are differences in preferences by race ethnicity in terms of what their preferred option was in November for casting their ballot. So again, this is everybody regardless of treatment. So by race ethnicity, 54% of non-Latino whites said mailing in their ballot was their top option. 54% of Asian Americans, but 48% of African Americans, and just about 48% of Latinos. So these differences suggest that if any voting options are made completely unavailable to eligible voters, that maybe there possibly could be some sort of disparate impact across groups. Next slide. And this is a bar chart just showing you exactly what I just showed you a moment ago, just visualizing it. 54%, again, what would be their most preferred way to cast a ballot, and this would be mailing it. 54% for white, 54% for Asian American, and less for a smaller percentage for African American and Latino. Next slide, please. I have a lot to show you, so I'm going to get through it fast. We will make these slides available, all of the slides today available, so you can peruse them and kind of wrap your brain around them further if you're interested in doing so. When we asked specifically, would you vote if mailing a mail ballot was your only option? Would you vote if mail balloting was your only option? We did hear that 5% of African Americans said they would not vote if their only option was a mail ballot, regardless of how they would send that in, but just a mail ballot. 4.8% of Asian Americans said they would not vote if their only option was a vote by mail ballot. 3% of non-Latino whites and 2.3% of Latinos. Next slide. This is just visualizing what I just mentioned. So if you go to the far right, you see that won't vote set of data, the 3.3, the 5, the 2.3, and the 4.8 by race ethnicity. Next slide. Then we said, well, we asked, would you vote still if voting in person was your only option? You were only given voting in person as your option. Here, 7.7% of non-Latino whites said they would not vote. 6% of Asian Americans, almost 6% of African Americans, and almost 5% of Latinos said they wouldn't vote if in person was their only option. By the way, these percentages seem small, but remember, we have 20 million registered voters in California, 25 million eligible voters in California. Small percentages, but if this actually translated into behavior beyond opinion, but actual behavior in November, we're talking very large numbers, right? Next slide. And I'm giving you statewide numbers, but we will be next week on our website posting an appendix that'll have data specific to LA County. Some of the numbers are different, especially by racial and ethnic groups, but the overall story in all of these slides are the same for LA, if you're wondering, and I want to make sure you know that. So personal preference on how to cast a ballot by race ethnicity. So we're just going to break this out here visually. Again, 7.7%, 5.7%, 4.6%, and 6%. Next slide. Now we asked, what about their comfort level at polling places, with or without social distancing? So we asked eligible voters about their comfort levels with waiting in line at a polling place or working as a poll worker, either with or without social distancing implemented. Next slide, please. So half of those surveys said that they would be comfortable at a polling place waiting in line that did not implement social distancing. So half said they would be comfortable if it didn't implement social distancing. Just shy of 36% of respondents overall said they would feel comfortable being a poll worker in a polling place without social distancing. We didn't ask them if they actually wanted to be a poll worker or not, but just as if would they feel comfortable. But comfort levels were much higher when we said that that polling place would adhere to social distancing protocol. So the comfort level for waiting in line jumped from half to 68.7%, and the comfort level for working at a polling place jumped from 36% to 47.4%, again, when we said that social distancing protocol would be adhered to. Next slide. This is just breaking it out by race ethnicity. So just to say that comfort level, this is specific, again, would they be comfortable waiting in line in a polling place if there were no social distancing measures implemented? And we said about half for everybody, if you remember a moment ago. Just to show you that there are pretty significant differences by race ethnicity. Latinos, 62% would be comfortable. Asian Americans, 36% said they would not be comfortable. 46% for African American and white. Non-Latino, next slide, please. But if we said, would you be comfortable waiting in line, which we did ask, for a polling place that was configured, right, for social distancing guidelines? Again, across the board, there's differences by race ethnicity, but across the board, everyone increased quite substantially in their comfort level when they heard that there would be social distancing protocols in place. Next slide. Okay, now this is poll worker. Again, just breaking out what I showed you a moment ago on those other slides. This is, would you be willing to work as a polling place worker if there were no social distancing measures put in place? Remember, it was about 36% for everybody. Well, you can see there's quite significant differences by race, ethnicity. Latinos being more comfortable, Asian Americans being less comfortable, whites, African Americans, the numbers are right there. Next slide. Now we ask, would you be willing to work as a polling place voter if social distancing measures were adhered to? So we do ask if you would be willing to work as. And you can see again, the differences here across groups, 40%, 50% for African Americans, that's almost 62% for Latinos, 36% for Asian American. The percentages jump up quite dramatically. Next slide. And again, I'm just giving you some general highlights here. There's much more in the report that I think might be of interest to many of you. So overall, a strong majority of California's eligible electorate, eligible voters, according to our survey, would prefer to cast a ballot by mail in November's election. But not all Californians favor this option. And we say option here kind of loosely because there are real reasons why people choose to vote in person versus voting, real barriers for many groups versus voting by mail. Choices about how to cast ballots vary significantly across racial and ethnic groups. Some voters say that they would not participate if the election were either conducted exclusively by mail or through in-person options. Next slide. And when thinking about in-person voting experiences, voters should read about scientific projections, again, back to those scenarios, which I only talked a little bit at the beginning, but I wanted just to let you know that this element is also in the report. Their comfort level about waiting in line at a polling place or being a poll worker also was impacted by the scenarios that they were presented around, again, fall or spring peak. There was also significant differences in that by comfort level by race, ethnicity, but voters of all types under all scenarios became much more comfortable with casting their ballots in a polling place that adheres to social distancing protocol. Next and last slide. Last thing I just want to mention, which I mentioned a little moment ago, but just to reiterate, this survey just is survey responses or opinion now as things stand. A lot of things can change between now and November, even though we do ask about these different scenarios. We're not necessarily measuring actual behavior. We will only know when, all this will be revealed, of course, in November 2020. But we hope that this data is important, at least for your conversations going forward. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and continue our presentation, and our panelists can go ahead and start joining us. So the next segment of our program today looks at the question, how does COVID-19 change voter engagement? And Katie, you can go ahead and start turning on everybody's camera so we can get started. So we have a great panel of experts. As we all know and heard, voting is changing in LA County. I can say changing again because we changed in March and now we're changing again. And so voter engagement has to change as well, given not just the new options for voting that are going to be available with everybody getting a vote by mail ballot, but also given our COVID-19 reality. And as we've heard, and we know it takes partnerships to make all of that happen. And we know from research that voter outreach to be successful takes multiple touches and contacts. And so our panel today is going to talk about the opportunities and the challenges to ensuring voter safety and what are the voting options. They're going to share about what they did for March and how they're going to be adapting their strategies for November. So I wanted to thank you guys for joining us. We have Jenny Carreon, Assistant Vice President for Civic Engagement in Altamed, and also Kirk Samuels, Director of Civic Engagement for Community Coalition. And we have a third panelist who will be joining us briefly, Wilma Franco, Executive Director of the Southeast LA Collaborative. So we're gonna go ahead and start, and I'll do a brief bio before each speaker. So let me go ahead and Jenny's gonna kick off our panel. And hey, Wilma. So Jenny has worked with Altamed in various phases of civic engagement and community power building initiatives. As you all may know, Altamed delivers 1 million annual patient visits through its 50 sites in Los Angeles and Orange County. Jenny has worked to create and implement strategies to achieve Altamed's political priorities and also represents the company to promote eliminating disparities in healthcare access for underserved communities. So thanks, Jenny, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on this question. How does COVID-19 change voter engagement?
Thank you, Astrid, and hello to our fellow policy leaders in this field. I'm going to start off with our PowerPoint presentation that we have. If you can go to the next slide, and this can give you a little more information on who we are and the work that we're doing. Altamed has been the nation's largest community health center, and we've been operating in chronically medically underserved communities for close to 50 years. We started as a social justice movement through the social justice movement. So ground organizing and empowering our community is something that's very part of our DNA. We decided to step things up about 5 years ago and do integrated voter engagement, and developed a actually comprehensive Get Out the Vote campaign that moves from just voter registration to actually having voter engagement in every aspect of the work that we do when patients visit us. And we did this for the simple reason that eliminating healthcare disparities is a priority of our organization. And we know that giving someone medicine is not going to keep them healthy, and it's not the only thing that they need as a community for us to get stronger and really change the power dynamics. Next slide. And I want to talk briefly about some of the work that we did. And in 2018, we contacted over 65,000 of our low propensity voters. Now, we did low propensity voters because most campaigns and parties and elections target high propensity voters, probably like those of us listening today. So we target low propensity voters, and many of them all are patients. And what we see is that when we take time to walk our community members through the process, they are interested in this process. They are excited about voting. And they're also interested in changing the power dynamics that are so prevalent in our community. Next slide. We also did a lot of social media work, and we had several engagements. Close to 23,000 of our patients were engaged through social media. Next slide. Throughout all of our clinics, and especially right now that we're thinking about COVID-19, our work specifically, because we're a healthcare organization, is still happening. So we haven't closed our doors. We're still open to servicing everyone that needs our support in our community, especially with any COVID-19 testing. So at all of our clinics, once you walk into the door, there's information there about the election. There's commercials playing. People are aware, our nurses and our medical staff is wearing census pins or election pins, and there's different messages at different stations of a patient's visit that talks to him about the election. We were able to see over 1 million impressions with all of this work that we did. Next slide. These are some of the results that we saw in some of our highest achieving precincts. So in Southgate, for example, we saw a 300% increase from 2004. And while that's something that we should be very impressed about, the registered voters in that specific precinct is 1,178. So there's still a lot of work for us to do in this arena. One of the things that we noticed is that when we were knocking on people's doors, no one even knew there was an election. We're absolutely targeting community members that nobody else is talking to. And more importantly, people are actually opening the doors to us. We have, we have hats on that says Altamed. We have shirts on that say Altamed. So when we knock on someone's door, they're like, "Oh, you're here from my doctor's office." We're saying, "Yes, we're here from your doctor's office." And your doctor says hello. Your doctor wanted to make sure everything is going well with you. But more importantly, your doctor wanted to let you know what this election is about and how important it is that you get out to vote. And, they're having us come inside the house, get un cafecito. And it's been really a remarkable experience. I've been a political strategist for close to 18 years, and I've been running several campaigns. And at first, when I was getting the numbers of responses that we were getting when we started this work at Altamed, they were just so high. And it really clicked that being a trusted messenger, as what we're seeing with our other panelists today, is really the key to engage our community. Next slide. And one of the most exciting things that happened, and I want to give a shout out to our manager, Cynthia Romo, was having vote centers. So Altamont was chosen to have vote centers at 9 of our locations. And these were locations where our patients were, our PACE locations for our senior population, where they were going to see their doctors, so they had to wait there for a while. And while they were waiting there, they were able to vote. And it just changed the whole dynamic of our experience. It really was a huge win for us. There was 49 vote centers throughout the county, and I just want to congratulate the county for this work. And we're really proud that out of all of the 49 vote centers, we had the most voters turn out at Altamed. And that's something that we take very seriously, and we are very proud of that work. Just institutionally, I have to say that there were some logistical ideas and challenges that we had to overcome. As an organization, having to protect patient data and HIPAA and all of our most vulnerable patient information, we had to follow a lot of regulations. But with the results that we had, it really was a game changer for us. Next slide. These are some of our seniors. There was a lot of articles that followed them and spoke to them about why they were so excited. And several of them mentioned they've been registered to vote for several years, but no one had ever taken them to their polling location, or they didn't know how to do it, or this iPad, they don't even know how to maneuver an iPad. And the fact that it was at our location, a place that's been in the community for 50 years, that they know it's a trusted messenger and trusted organization for them as a service provider, they really felt comfortable voting. And our lines were huge, but we were very excited about that. We're very excited to be servicing that, and we look forward to working with the county in expanding not just the locations, but the amount of days, because we just had 1 day per each location. And we think in order to really get more folks to vote, especially during COVID-19, where we are our staff are medical experts, so they understand about social distancing and all of the PPE that's going to be required, and how we're going to be able to keep everybody safe, not just our internal staff, but also our patients and our future voters safe. Next slide. This was at our corporate office, and we also did voting at our corporate office. Altamed hires, we have 35,000 staff, and 92% of them are from the service area that we work in. So it was really exciting to also see management and all of our corporate staff voting. And they were just so impressed that they were able to vote from work. And that's something I would definitely encourage any organization that has capacity to host one of these. It was a really great experience for our staff. Next slide. The key takeaways from our flex voting: we had 455 people that voted, many of them for the first time, many of them immigrants, all of them from chronically medically underserved communities. And we were able to do this because we were able to leverage that we're a trusted messenger, and we had strong support from our staff that now really believe in this model. Next slide. With this happening, we're also working on, now that the primary election is over, we're also now working on census, even though, this is still, we're also wrapping up for the election. But as of date, we've spoken to over 1.1 million homes, households, and we talked to 53,000 people. 52 of them have already mentioned that they filled out the census, but we still have a long way to go. So we're doing a lot of texting and continuing the civic engagement work. Next slide. This is some of our information that's available on our website about the election and census. The important thing that we wanted to do as a trusted messenger is create information and materials that can be replicated, because other health centers may not have the information available to them. So we have talking points, we have posters, we have pins, you name it. It's all on our website, and you can very easily add your logo and use it as you wish, because in order to really change the power dynamics in our community, we're going to need all health centers and community nonprofits to work together in this. Next slide. This is some of the work that's happening right now in COVID-19. Even though you know, we have stopped a lot of our work, we have moved everything outdoors. So now everything is happening outdoor at our evaluation centers, and people are being talked to about the election and the census. And next slide. And to close, I want to invite everyone to download our app, My Vote, My Health. You can find it very easily. This will keep you informed with all the work that we're doing around the election and just civic engagement generally. And we look forward to working with you all. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jenny, for that overview. And let's move on to our next presenter. Kirk Samuels, Director of Civic Engagement for Community Coalition. Community Coalition works to transform the social and economic conditions in South LA by building a community institution that involves thousands in creating and influencing change in public policy. Kirk is responsible for developing and implementing outreach strategies that inform and motivate residents of South LA. So thank you, Kirk, for joining us, and we look forward to learning from your strategies.
Thank you, Astrid, for that introduction. All right, so yes, Community Coalition. Let me tell you a little bit about my organization and some of the work we're doing around the elections here in 2020. Okay, well, I'll just say, so Community Coalition, we were created in 1990 in response to the crack epidemic that hit South Los Angeles. So actually, Congressmember Karen Bass, well, now today, Congressmember Karen Bass is our founding member, and through the campaigns that she launched through community organizing, we were able to have a response to the crack epidemic and actually shut down over 200 liquor stores. So going forward from that space, we actually did work in high schools. We did a lot of different work around public policy. So this is how we got into the integrated voter engagement that you see in front of you. All right. So integrated voter engagement, I just want to kind of unpack that and discuss what do we mean when we say integrated voter engagement. So firstly, this is a multi-year strategy to increase the voter participation of folks most impacted. So just specifically speaking, our people. We engage people year round to build relationships, educate them on issues, and motivate them to get involved. So usually when a campaign is doing outreach, they'll show up once every 4 years to speak with the voters in our community, and then you kind of never hear from them again. So what we wanted to do is make sure that we're engaging our residents, not only during election cycles, but also outside of election cycles, so that they're in the loop and that they have the right popular education to make an informed vote. We work to involve people beyond voting. So once again, it's not just mobilizing somebody to the ballot box, but it's actually keeping them on ramped into the campaigns, the community events, and the other organizing we're doing on a local level. Excuse me. And it's led by local community-based organizations. So they have a deep root and embrace IVE as a core part of their organizing strategy and ongoing work. And we develop grassroots leaders who help lead the organizing. So once again, from these grassroots efforts, we're able to develop our residents into real leaders in their community where they can act as a hub of information for their neighbors. They're also doing levels of lobbying and going to hearings and just really getting engaged in the civic process. And we use the use of voter engagement technology and database to increase the scale and systematic tracking and analysis of our voter engagement. So I just know specifically for me, when I first started out doing outreach, I was always using a clipboard and a paper. And now, fast forward a few years, everything is digitized, where we're using tablets to record data and share information using Google spreadsheets. So as the field change, we want to make sure that we're optimizing the best technology possible so we can have the most up-to-date results. Yeah, discussing our voting efforts here in 2020. This past March, when VCA was first implemented in LA County, we were able to contact almost 22,000 voters, and we actually mobilized 140 volunteers to participate in this outreach. So going back to what I stated earlier, having volunteers, having grassroots leaders be part of this campaign is something that's very important and valued by us, because we believe it's our community that should inform and direct the policy. We held 4 community solidarity events. This is a great place to cultivate leadership and cultivate let's say like a pep rally kind of atmosphere for the upcoming election, so we can have the highest turnout possible. And then something that was implemented this time, which actually came in really key, was the vote center oversight. So speaking specifically when it comes to South Los Angeles, and I believe some of our the presenter said this earlier, there's a large portion of South Los Angeles voters who prefer to vote in person as opposed to voting by mail. So a lot of people have been going to the same polling places for years and years. So with the closure of a lot of these polling places and transitioning them to vote centers, a lot of our voters were confused. They were going to the old place only to find it being empty, and then not knowing where to go vote or not knowing where the closest voting center is. There's also a digital divide that's happening in our community where a lot of our elder seniors don't have access to high-speed internet. So that presented an issue. Going forward into summer 2020, we want to make sure that we have continual voter engagement throughout the summer. And then in looking towards November, we want to make sure that we capitalize on having state VBMs, vote by mail. What does that look like? How can we encourage our folks to take advantage of having this ballot? And then lastly, the vote center locations and ratios. If we can think of a way of doing this safely and ensuring that we're practicing social distancing, can we have vote centers in the low propensity areas to accommodate our population of voters who prefer to vote in person as opposed to voting by mail? Next slide, please. Some of the challenges we encountered during this election year was COVID-19, which is kind of self-explanatory, right? Voters weren't feeling safe to come, voters not coming out. What can we do to make voters feel safe in the event that we do have these physical voting locations for our community? Vote by mail, like we stated earlier. Some folks are just opposed to voting by mail, whether it's government distrust or maybe it's just having a set way of doing something. Vote by mail doesn't seem to be popular in a lot of our for a lot of our community. Creative outreach in the absence of door-to-door. So this is an important one. We find that we have our highest turnaround when we do door-to-door knocks and we have face-to-face conversations with our community members. That intimate conversation where we can exchange information and be completely transparent is really our bread and butter. So we're trying to find a way to pivot that in the event that we're not able to do physical contact. So we've explored with text messaging as opposed to doing the door-to-door, face-to-face conversations, and we're exploring with phone banking. Now we have seen a great responses via the text versus the phone banking, but it still doesn't really capture that same kind of response we had door-to-door. So we're looking to elevate those efforts coming sooner. Elevating the importance of the elections, have everybody talking about it. Simply put, every day when you look at the news, you hear about COVID-19. So it's easy for not only the election, but just local propositions and policies that are important to our community getting pushed to the back burner. So how do we keep this in the forefront and keep people focused on election day? The vote center locations, once again, the locations, the equipment, and the poll workers. When we were doing our oversight of the vote centers, we found out that some of the vote centers had lines going around the entire building, going around the block. Meanwhile, other locations that a lot of people weren't privy to were completely empty. So how can we make sure that people have up-to-date information about which locations have the longest lines or the shortest lines? Malfunctioning equipment was something we ran into a lot. We would go to a vote center, they may have 4 machines not working. So how can we make sure that the poll workers are staying on top of the maintenance of the equipment so our community can get in, cast their vote, and leave? Now, some of the opportunities that we do want to highlight and capitalize on are that just during this moment, people want to do something. We've seen a great turnout for our virtual meetings. Now, traditionally, we would do convenings, we would do conventions. We have a huge festival we do every summer called the People Power Festival, where folks will come out and we just get to meet our neighbors. We play music, we eat some really good food, but at the same time, we're getting educated on what public policies and what kind of issues are going on. So, and now that we've lost the opportunity to gather together and have this social space, can we convert these into virtual meetings, kind of like the one we're on right now, and still have that same kind of impact? We just did a car caravan downtown Los Angeles. We were able to turn out over 300 vehicles for Care for All to discuss with the city council. So we do know that people are still want to be engaged, they still want to be active, and they still want to get involved. So how do we use that energy and propel that towards November? Can we increase the VC and low propensity locations? Pretty much what I was alluding to earlier. And then lastly, the technology. can we galvanize and use this new technology to mobilize our people to the polling place, to the vote centers? All right, so thank you for, that concludes my presentation.
Great, thanks for your presentation. And we're gonna have questions as soon as we hear from our last panelist, so please go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A. And our last presenter is Wilma Franco, Executive Director for Southeast LA Collaborative. And this is a network of organizations working to increase civic engagement in Southeast LA. Wilma has over 10 years of experience in overseeing nonprofits and community-based programs, and we look forward to hearing from her as well.
Hi, thank you everybody, and thank you for having us today. Again, my name is Wilma Franco. I'm the Executive Director for the SELA Collaborative. So we're very happy to be here today. We're glad to to be able to join this conversation. We can go to the next slide. So as we mentioned, our collaborative is actually a network of organizations. So I want to just start by honoring all of our members. We have 12 organizations that are part of our collaborative, and all of which are at the forefront of really kind of supporting our community in this time. Next slide. So one of the things that we love to start with is just really kind of highlighting the vision of the collaborative is really our hope is that SELA will become a resource-rich region with a strong nonprofit community and healthy, resilient, civically engaged residents that drive their own future. So this map here, we like to include it. We understand sometimes people consider SELA to be a little larger than what we consider it. So this is what we as a collaborative consider the Southeast region. Next slide. So a lot of our work is really kind of grounded in this regional identity, right? So as we look at our work, it's really looking at that entire map of the small cities, eight small cities and 2 unincorporated areas, but also an area that has a very large population, right? It's predominantly Latino, it's about 96% Latino community. And then there's 3 specific areas that we focus on: nonprofit capacity building, civic engagement, and data-driven research. And for us, data is something that we utilize to really ensure that our decisions and how we do and execute the work is grounded on data, both from the community and from different stakeholders, and really kind of enhancing our network. Next slide. So, as we were thinking of this question that was posed to us, I think, one of the things that I began to really kind of think about was, it's really going to take new ways of reaching our community, engaging our community, and empowering our community. And the best way that I can really kind of, present this information was in some of the work that we're doing around our census work. So you can go next. As we as a collaborative, you can hit next slide. Thank you. So for the census work, the SELA Collaborative, we're actually the regional lead for the Southeast region on the census. So that means that similar to Kirk, actually, we're co-conveners. So we're partnering with all the organizations that are doing work in the Southeast, but also ensuring that we're engaging the cities, elected officials, the faith-based community, and nonprofit organizations, because we know that it's going to take a very collaborative and collective approach to ensuring a complete count. So I want to kind of ground the presentation because I see a lot of correlations between what's happening with the census with some of the things that we'll need to do moving forward in engaging voters. Next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight, our work around census began as early as June 2018. And some of the work that we did with really kind of gathering data from community really highlighted these barriers to our community completing the census. And those overarching challenges really kind of fell into 3 buckets. One, the fear and distrust of government, which, given the political climate continues to exist, right? If not, it's been intensified. Lack of access to technology. A lot of this was in response to the fact that the census would be, for the first time, electronic, right? And then the last piece being a lack of understanding of the importance of the census and its benefits. So when we talked to community, we heard a lot of the community saying the reasons why I didn't complete it was because I don't understand what the benefit is. I don't know what the impact to me as an individual might be. And then for those folks that did complete it, when we asked them, well, what was the reason why you did complete it, they highlighted this piece specifically and saying, well, I know that it helps our community and it brings resources. So there was that notion of like, how do we ensure that there's a clear understanding as far as like what the impact is, right? So next. We just recently, about 2 weeks ago, released the Living and Working in Selma survey, which is highlights of a report. This is a community poll that we completed in the Southeast region. Can you hit next? So one of the things that we asked our residents was what was their preference in completing the census form, whether it was online by mail. So, more than, 62% actually prefer mail, in person, and in phone. So that, correlates along the lines of what we kind of anticipated with some of the work that we did previously, which became very important because it also highlighted some of the, and confirmed some of the strategies that we had identified. So next slide. So one of the things that for us became very important, right, as we really kind of heard community, collected all this data, was that trusted messages were going to be critical in ensuring that our community felt safe in completing the census and they really understood what was the importance of it. So in our most recent survey, this was also additionally confirmed, right, when we asked, who are the trusted messengers. Doctors and nurses and teachers have continued to be at the top of the list for our community. So this is why the work that Jenny does with Ultimate is so critical to ensuring that our community is aware of how they can be civically engaged, right? Additionally, I think one of the pieces that is not highlighted here, but we knew from previous conversations and data gathering with community, was that youth and family members play a huge role as well in ensuring that our community can complete the census or can engage in different type of civic activity, right? Because of that, I think part of the rationale around the messaging piece was also critical, like ensuring that when we talked about the census, that we made sure that it wasn't just saying, it's important for you to complete the census because, it impacts the electoral vote. Well, that's not something that is going to make that big of a emotional reaction for someone that their interest is like, well, I need resources for school, or my children are struggling, or, those type of messaging, right? So how do we make it applicable to the daily lives of our community? And then the last piece for us was access to computers and support. So can you hit next, please? And so early on, and in partnership, and I love to highlight the fact that as the co-conveners, right, we're partnering with all these different organizations. And one of the things that we did was with all of our colleagues and all of our CBO partners, we identified this top 4 outreach activities ranked by popularity. So as you can, you look at this list, and a lot of it is that face-to-face, like events, conversations, like door-to-door, digital media. Like how do you also have community assistance centers? But then COVID hits, right? And can you hit next? And what we found was that once COVID came into really kind of changed everything for us, all of the strategies that we had identified were now no longer viable, right? We were no longer able to do these activities. All of our plans, all of our colleagues' plans went out the door, and it really kind of highlighted the only things we have left are this digital media outreach, but also phone banking, right? So this is, again, the work that Kirk and Jenny have been doing around phone banking and really kind of reaching community is critical in ensuring that we have an impact, right? So next slide. So if you've ever attended one of our meetings, you know that we love montage. We love to celebrate all of the colleagues' work. So this was actually an animated, so I would need you to just keep clicking next on this one. So some of the things that we saw was that as our plans shifted, so did the strategies and the creativeness around all of our colleagues, right? So there were things like raffles, memes, specific virtual events for targeting specific community, right? How do you reach the congregations? Because we knew that the faith-based community also plays a role in ensuring that there's that clear message to community that it's safe for you to complete the census, right? You can click next. There's a few other. Then there was also, people creating videos, right? How do you make this more friendly? How do you kind of continue to send that message for folks? And then, as we, our partners continue to be at the front line and supporting with COVID, taking every opportunity that we had to really include the census as a message that consistently is being put forward, to continue to remind folks while being sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of need in our community and that our communities are struggling. And then more recently, I think some of the more creative ways that, we've, kind of all come together is around this, census caravans, right? So how do we work together? How do we, throw a party while we're driving and continue to, kind of keep social distancing and ensure that our communities still hearing about the census, right? And that they completed. So I think for me, the biggest takeaways here, and the reason why I wanted to kind of ground this work on the census, is because there's a lot for us to learn from this, new strategies, and how our colleagues and a lot of the CBOs that are doing the census work have had to shift their strategies. So I think in order, and as we think about voter engagement, post-COVID, it's going to really take this multidimensional innovative approach. So if we know, for example, that a lot of our Latino community uses WhatsApp for a lot of things, right? How do we run a campaign through that, right? How do we still reach community through that? Is that something that some of us can come together and try to figure out, right? And I think a lot of that is happening now. We know that when it comes to voter engagement, youth are very important, right? And the one thing I see even my, 10-year-old using all the time is TikTok. So how do we, continue to make videos and send it through those channels, right? And then the other piece is moving beyond just access, right? I think COVID has definitely highlighted for us that it's not as simple as saying, here you go, parents, here's a computer. Now you're ready to go and homeschool your children. I could tell you it's been a struggle for me as a single mom to try to homeschool my child. So I think it's going to take a lot of that sense of, if, the forms are coming to all the community, that they can vote with the mail-in ballots, then it's going to require us to really also think about how do we help people understand how do you fill that form, right? I personally have family that have already asked, well, when we get to the elections, can you help me fill out the form? Because I've never done that. Or I didn't complete it in March because I didn't know how to complete the form. So I think those are things that we have to keep in mind. Just saying, here is the form, go ahead and vote, or here's a list of sites doesn't necessarily translate to people actually going out and voting, right? Because there's a lot of other barriers that we often have to overcome. And then, I think the messaging, again, this is going to be critical. I don't think that it's sufficient in saying you should go out because it's important. I think we have to continue to send the message of how these decisions and our participation in the election has a real impact to us as individuals. But I think with COVID, I think we also have to keep in mind that we're living some tough times, and we're, a lot of us, our anxiety is up. Some of us are, stressing out about a lot of things. So if you can hit next, I think we just have to keep in mind, how do we bring humor into this? How do we make this fun? How do we make this exciting? And continue to encourage people, right? I don't think that shaming people or saying, why haven't you completed, or why haven't you voted, is going to help. I think is, bringing the humor, the light side of this. And I think our communities are great at doing that. But I think we need more of that, especially at this times where there's not a lot of human interactions and there's so much more safety concerns. So how do we continue to do this? I think is going to be just being very strategic, very innovative in the way that we do it, but it is also going to continue for us to come together collectively and collaborate with each other to ensure that we are really supporting our community. So that's it for my slides. Just the next one, I would just, follow us on our social media channels. Visit us at our website, and please let us know if there's anything else we can support you with. Thank you.
Great, thank you to our panelists. I'm gonna ask everybody to come back on live, and we have very limited time for Q&A, but we are gonna transition into a network discussion, and most of our panelists are gonna be in that as well, so we'll have opportunity to continue the conversation. So one question that I wanted to have everybody get a chance to answer in the time that we have left is, Wilma's slide really resonated with me, where she shows this was the plan, and then COVID-19 happened, and then scratch, 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 right? everything changes what we thought we were going to do. And I want to thank you guys for coming into this panel, because nobody really knows how to do civic engagement in a pandemic. So I want to thank you for just offering your ideas. And we know that a lot of nonprofits listening in today and government offices are rethinking their strategies. So how do you evaluate? How did you guys start thinking about that process? How do you prioritize, given that there's already a lot of information overwhelmness for voters, potential voters? So Jenny, can you go ahead and take that? And then we'll go Jenny, Kirk, and Wilma, so everybody gets a chance to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Astrid. We have the luxury and the curse that we are a healthcare organization, right? So we have medical experts giving us guidance on every aspect of every communication that we're doing. So luckily, we've been able to work on everything that we've been working on communicating with our community members, and now thinking of how do we do that in a safe space. What I just want to encourage everyone is that we are still, what hasn't changed is that we're still a trusted messenger. Our community nonprofit organizations are still the trusted messenger, and we have to, just think collectively on how we encourage everyone to vote in the middle of a pandemic, in a middle of a new voting system, and encourage them, especially now with certain issues. It's not just, it's your civic responsibility. I really agree with Wilma. It's not about we're gonna gain some congressional seats or what presidential propositions are gonna be important. But this is for your community. This is for all of us, especially right now. We need healthcare access. We need community empowerment. We need better schools. So making it local and emphasizing on the importance that together we can get through this.
All right, Astrid, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question one time? I just would like to have it fresh.
Yeah, of course. I mean, all of us are having to rethink our strategies, right? I know organizations start planning really early, and by March, many had a sense of what they wanted to do for November.
Right.
But given the quick pivot, how do organizations start prioritizing? How do they begin the planning process that feels incredibly overwhelming in this new environment?
Right. So for us, the planning process looks exactly the same. It's just at different steps. So instead of mobilizing folks to the polling place or to the vote center, now we're mobilizing folks to the virtual event. We're still sharing the same information. We're still speaking with the same residents. And we're, like Jenny said earlier, we're still the trusted messenger. So this is what we're honing in on. Yeah. And this is what we have to lift up. We have to lift up.
And Kirk, I know you answered on the Q&A, but can you go ahead and share your response earlier about how do you keep the level of engagement and enthusiasm when you transition from in-person to virtual?
Right. So the biggest, I guess, the results we saw from our virtual meetings were we had a lot more retention of folks in our meetings when we engaged the audience. So creating breakout rooms where folks can voice their opinion, where folks can talk to other people that are in the call, get to meet each other, kind of network, creating those environments, making it feel more like an in-person meeting as opposed to like a staff meeting. That's what we saw to be the best. Also, kind of what Wilma said, make it fun. This doesn't have to be something that's mundane. It doesn't have to be something that's boring. We can play music, we can talk, we can still have, laugh, share jokes and memes, and just make it something that's enjoyable for folks, because let's be real, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We've all been stuck in our homes and we want to go outside. So how can we make this fun? How can we make this enjoyable for our community members?
Yeah, thank you. And Wilma, how do we keep it real with everybody? You had some really great insight about how to keep it very personal. So what would you recommend to folks as they're starting to think about their messaging?
Yeah, I think, I think we sometimes overlook the fact that we ourselves, right, as individuals and as leaders are trusted messengers ourselves, right? Like not just our organizations and who we represent, but also us, right? So doing things like, I've seen folks do like this is why I'm voting, or this is why I'm making sure that I'm counted, right? Because the reality is we all have our own networks of colleagues and friends that trust our judgment, right? And look to us to really kind of understand a lot of these pieces. So how do we even leverage ourselves, right? Of, how can I make a TikTok video that's like fun and exciting and share it and, putting us out of our comfort zone sometimes, right? I have the luxury of having two boys that love making videos. So I'm constantly like, you want to make a census video? And then I just let them go and do their thing. Minus the moments where they say, don't get COVID, don't get the virus. And I'm like, please don't say that to people. So, it's allowing us to just be creative, right? And I think sometimes we think in this very manner of like everything has to be in this structure. And I think this is a space where our innovation, our just creativity and really connecting with each other, right? It's
Absolutely.
going to allow us to have these experiences, right? I know that, you know, the Census Caravan was something that, you know, James and Long Beach Forward and Long Beach put together. We joined his efforts, right, to support them in Long Beach. And then, you know, from there, it just sparked this like movement of like, everybody wants to do caravans. And we're like, hey, we're for it. Let's make it a party.
Bring back the tailgate parties. So I want to thank everybody. We are at 4 o'clock, so we're going to continue our program. Like I said, we are going to continue our network discussion. Jenny, I think you had a hard stop at 4. So do you want to give everybody just a final thought as we conclude, and we'll continue the conversation with Kirk and with Wilma?
Yeah, we have 166 days until the election, and every day is very valuable that we talk to as many people as possible and we let them know that there's so much at stake for this election. I also want to invite everyone to go to our website, www.myvotemyhealth, and that's where you can find all of our toolkits or any information that you may be able to use. And if you have any input for us or things that we need to change or maybe add in different languages, collectively is how we're going to really change the power dynamics in our community. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Bye. So we're going to transition right away into the last segment of our presentation, which we're calling the network discussion. And joining this panel is going to be our steering committee from Voters Choice Los Angeles. You heard this project mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to share a bit about who we are and what we're doing. So as was shared, Future of California Elections is a cross-sector model. We launched Voters Choice California in 2017, focused on supporting communities transitioning to the Voters Choice Act. And then in 2019, just last year, we started a local network called the Voters Choice Los Angeles Network, which Registrar Dean Logan mentioned. And so joining us right now, we have, sorry, just catching myself up. We have Brittany Stonesifer, voting rights attorney with ACLU. We have Ellie Flores, the California Director of Civic Engagement with NALEO Educational Fund. And you guys can just wave hi. This is like the informal part of the program. We have James Woodson, Senior Policy Manager with California Calls. Kiana Asmanfar, Policy Manager for California Calls. And we of course have Mindy Romero back with USC California Civic Engagement Project. And then the way this is going to work is we're going to continue the Q&A conversation. We did get a lot more questions coming in, so please keep on dropping them in the chat. And I want to thank Harley Ham, Director of Program and Events with USC Price School, who's going to help facilitate that Q&A and she'll read them out, and then the panel will continue answering those questions. So that's kind of the format. Please go ahead and pose your questions or comments. We'll have the panel react to it. What concerns do you have? How do you feel about the election? What challenges do you still want addressed that we haven't covered today? I know there's still a lot of questions out there. So with that, do we have any questions coming in, Harley?
I do. So the first question is, what % turnout would be acceptable, and how does that compare to districts that have good voting percentage?
An open question for those that are doing this work. How do you measure what's good? How do you measure success for your organizations? Maybe we can hear from Ellie, who's just joining us, and then from James Woodson.
Hi, everyone. And I'm glad to see all the familiar faces and everyone who is listening. So, so I don't have, I think, a specific answer to you on what I think we think the percentage of Latino, for us, right, at NALEO, is specifically Latino voters, right? What would be the percentage? What would be success for us? I think one of the things that we're focusing as an organization right now is to really look at, making sure that Latinos that want to vote understand all of the options that exist to vote, right? I think we're hearing a lot about vote by mail, right? And I think that for us, we understand that there is going to be a large amount of Latinos that are still going to want to vote in person, right? And so for us, as part of this work is to figure out how to educate those Latinos, how to get that information to them, right? And I think for us in measuring success, right, is are we able to get that information to them? Are we able to educate them? And ultimately, are we able to make sure that they get out to vote, right? And so for us, it's also going to be key on the messaging. I think for, everything is sort of around COVID. And I know right now, as we've been working on the census work as well, a lot of things are surrounding COVID, right? And although we do have to speak to the concerns that Latinos may have around, let's say, safety, right, and around COVID, that should probably not be at the core of our messaging. Similar to census, right? On the census front, Latinos were very concerned about confidentiality, right? And so we address confidentiality, but then we make sure that we talked about the issues and the things that Latinos care about, right? In terms of the programs, in terms of the benefits. So I think in terms of the elections, for us, it's going to be similar. We will speak to sort of the safety aspects and we will speak to that. But I think we do have to keep in mind what research says about what Latinos truly care about when it comes to election work. And that still is, right, education, that still is health, immigration, and jobs. So at the core of our messaging, I think we'll be talking about that. And so I think for us, we'll continue to work on that with all the agencies here today and sort of figuring out what are the key messages and to making sure that Latinos that still want to vote, right, in person are able to have access to vote in person. And particularly those folks that do want to vote in person, many times it's due to a language accessibility factor, right? They would like some sort of assistance in language. So I think for us, we'll be looking at that. We'll be hopefully working with all the agencies here on ensuring that Latinos get all the information and education on the options available to them to get out and vote.
Great, and thanks, Elio. And I want to go back to that messaging in a bit, but I want to give James a chance to answer. How do you measure success for your network? What's the right number of, yes, we succeeded in turnout?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that go into determining what turnout's going to look like in any election. I think it's important to, make sure you're doing apples to apples comparisons, right? So one of the ways that you could do that is to look at, 2016 turnout, 2012 turnout. We know at least in 2016, actually, one of the strategies of one of the candidates was to actually drive down turnout, right? So 2016 actually saw a lower turnout than we normally would in a presidential election. I think, folks generally think that this year is going to be, fairly large turnout. I think the COVID pandemic, obviously throws a wrench in that, right? We don't know how folks will respond. But, I'll use Community Coalition as an example because they are part of the California Cause Network. And, one of the things that we might do for their work, right, is to look at the Black and Latino voters that they talk to in South LA and compare that to Black and Latino turnout overall, right, in South LA. And really look at, did they have, an increase in turnout compared to, the folks that they spoke to compared to just overall. We might look at, how Black and Latino voters turned out in the county to really kind of measure, how effective our conversations were. And so, yeah, again, there's ways that we can kind of tell, and I think it's probably early at this point to tell what overall turnout will look like for November. But I think as we get closer, folks will start to narrow down on that.
Great, thanks. And Harley, do we have other questions?
I do. I have another one. Is civic duty a sufficient motivator to get people to vote? What else sparks people to action?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that question. And Wilma, thank you for joining us. I got a text that you're heading out, but we appreciate you coming and spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
So that question around is civic duty, right? That's really, when we think about messaging, that's often a message that we lead with. Ellie just shared that they're going to take a strategy to continue focusing on messaging that speaks to the priorities of Latino voters. What are strategies for messaging that your organizations are thinking about? And Kirk, I'd love to hear from you on this point as well, since you talked about doing a lot of voter contact in your work.
Thank you. I got to take a quote from the great Congressmember Karen Bass. I learned this back in 2015. I've been carrying it with me. This has kind of been my mantra ever since. Nothing activates people to action more than frustration. Or another way of putting it is nothing gets rid of the frustration than taking action. Nothing gets rid of it like taking action. So a lot of our folks, you know, we have all these concerns, whether it be police brutality or healthcare, and we want to feel like we're doing something about it. So when you give folks a pathway of action so you can actually see the real-time results, so they can feel like they contributed to the victory, that's where you get the lifelong organizers. This is where you get the lifelong grassroots leaders. This is where you get the folks that are going to go, and when they're in the barbershop or when they're at the grocery store, they're going to be talking about the election. So it's making it real to them, identifying their self-interest, and then giving them a pathway to activation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's powerful. That gave me chills. That's a great quote to be inspired by. Harley, if you can keep on going through the question that we have left.
Sure. Next question is, I love the diversity of this panel, but was wondering if anyone can speak to the outreach to the AAPI community.
Yeah, and a lot of the organizations here are network organizations, so I wanted to go ahead and put that out there. I know that we all work in collaboration across the diversity of Los Angeles County. So could somebody speak to us about outreach and how the Asian American Pacific Islander community is approaching voter education and outreach within your networks?
This is Brittany from ACLU. I can just share that one of the partners that we have in Future of California Elections is Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which is an amazing organization and really leads both a lot of research and a lot of civic engagement and policy work, specifically targeting the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And historically what they've done is a lot of both outreach and poll monitoring during elections. And I know, of course, those efforts might have to change during a COVID environment, but they are an amazing organization and encourage people to check them out.
Thanks, Brittany. And we don't have any other questions coming in. So if you guys have additional ones you have not answered or you are thinking about out in the audience, please go ahead and post them. I had questions around that, right? So part of the Voters Choice Los Angeles Network is building a representative network within LA County. We have the South Asian Network as well, who's partnered with us. And everybody's thinking about how do we transition our traditional in-person outreach, which we have seen and data has showed is the most successful, into now a virtual or meeting people in social media spaces. And Kiana, I want to direct this one to you. California Call has done a lot of digital strategy and organizing, most recently around the mock election that LA County hosted. Can you share with us some learnings that you guys had there as people are transitioning perhaps in a new way of outreach? What should people keep in mind for digital organizing? And then I'll let others answer that question after that as well.
Yeah, so I think, and some of the earlier panelists mentioned this, but I think starting with positive messaging. I know, around this COVID crisis, there's a lot of stress and anxiety. And while we want to make sure that voting centers are safe and accessible, that should be more of a sub message rather than the leading message. So what we did in the mock election was we really led with what was on the ballot and encouraging people to participate. I'm sure some of you probably remember, but we had, what is LA County's best beach? What is LA County's worst freeway on the ballot in the mock election? And I think using that kind of messaging that gets people excited will be really, really important. I also think, in addition to the civic duty, there are different messages that speak to different communities. Civic duty could speak to some individuals, but I think also given the situation that we're in, voting is really an opportunity for people to take control and take power and shape their future by voting and making decisions that are on the ballot. So I think, using that message of empowerment will be really, really important in this upcoming election. I also think that we're in a little bit of a unique situation because not only are we having a bit of a temporary shift in response to coronavirus, we also are still in the middle of educating LA County voters about the changes that were made with the VSAT program. So not only do we have to continue educating people about countywide voting, the availability of same-day registration, their ability to use an accessible ballot marking device to cast their vote in 13 plus languages. We're gonna have to continue doing that work and educating voters about those changes while also clarifying what might be different this fall in LA County. So that's something that I think we should be aware of and have further discussions about.
Great, thanks, Kiana. And others that want to jump in and provide tips on digital organizing for organizations that may be doing this as a new strategy?
Yeah, if one tip that we do have is creating toolkits in your digital organizing for your members to share, making it easy for them with the kind of step-by-step of how to do, whether it's a post or sharing to like an Instagram story. Doing toolkits and just sharing that out with your membership base is always effective.
Yeah, and if I can share, I think some of the things that we've learned through the work that we're doing now and in the past, right, is the strategies that in order to reach Latinos, and especially now, we'll have to sort of include reaching folks digitally, right? And so for us, when we're talking about Latinos, the Latinos that we want to reach, we have to also recognize where they are, right, in the digital space. So Twitter for us is not the space where the Latinos we are trying to reach for the elections are, right? Most likely those Latinos would be over on Facebook, or they will be on Instagram, right? To some extent, TikTok, right? We've been seeing more and more organizations use TikTok as a way to reach folks. So I think that's a interesting sort of like new strategy to making outreaching fun, right? And interactive as well. So I think we have to keep in mind those strategies for this election, right? I think continuing of the production of in-language sort of material and in-language like Facebook Lives and stuff of that nature, right? I think we have to make sure that also any of those sort of hotlines that exist that are there to support voters. So like certainly at NALEO, we have our 877 Ve y Vota hotline. I think also you have Chirla that has a hotline as well. So I think, these hotlines need to be shared widely so that there is another layer of support that exists for those voters, right, that want information and want support in making sure that they can go out and vote, or if they need support in actually mailing in their ballot, right, that you have those places. And then lastly, I will share that the traditional sort of media segments, particularly for the Spanish sort of media, are still very effective. So you're talking about like your Univision segments, your Telemundo segments, even your radio segments, right? For the census work, faith-based local radio was really effective with talking, or has been effective with talking about the census, and continues to be effective to this day. So I think you have to really use all of those strategies to make sure that you can reach, in our case, that we can reach the Latino population to ensure that they get the information, education, and that ultimately they go out and actually cast a ballot.
Great, thank you. We have about 8 minutes left. I had a question for Brittany, representing the ACLU. Voting rights are incredibly important. Kiana just talked about, the various opportunities that people have to make sure that they can vote, from same-day registration to voters that are formerly incarcerated who may be new. So voting is changing yet again. What are the resources, what are the tools that voters can use to know their rights? How can organizations get access to those tools? I know that you all do some great work around this.
Sure. So the Secretary of State's website is a good place to get reliable information about what is going to be happening statewide. Dean Logan's website, but also California, or ACLU of California, and then our different affiliates are going to be doing outreach this November. So we do a voter pledge program, and to go back to how you can organize in a digital environment. Really, it's a matter of taking a lot of the resources that we already used in a pre-COVID environment and adapting those to this new format. So voter pledge program is a great example. So getting a voter to promise to vote. And then there's a great organization using a strategy called vote tripling. So just very simply get your supporters to promise to turn out 3 additional people to vote with them. And that doesn't have to be in person. It can be in person, but it can also be done if you're all voting by mail. You can text a friend and remind them, hey, have you turned in your ballot yet? And then you can also do voter engagement. You can empower voters to do their own voter engagement. So instead of having a ballot completion party that's in person, you can have a webinar party with your friends to fill out your ballots together over Zoom. But reliable voter information, good place to check is the Secretary of State's website, and then your local registrar of voters. But there's also the election protection program. So if on election day you're trying to figure out what your your right to vote is, check out the Election Protection Programs hotline.
Great. Thanks for that overview. And we'll share some of these resources in a post-event email. So Mindy, LA County is transitioning to all vote by mail for the first time. And you did some great research around that voter experience. When counties transitioned in 2018 for the first time to the Voters' Choice Act, what are some things that organizations should keep in mind? What are some of the areas that voters struggled with? And if you can share some of those tips that the data already shows for the groups that are with us today.
Sure. Well, first I'll direct folks to our website, ccep.usc.org. .edu. I have two sites. They both direct to the same thing. And if you go to our publications, to election policy research, you'll see a number of research reports that we put out around this kind of question around outreach and education under the VCA model. So I think just a couple things I'll mention really quickly. Just understanding first and foremost the monumental effort that it takes, and everybody understands this on the call, so I don't need to tell them this, but the monumental effort that it takes to successfully outreach to folks around the VCA, being a new model, making sure folks get the entire message, not just part of the message, so they understand all of their options, that they feel comfortable, not just with the nuts and bolts, but also with why there are these changes, how they can benefit them. We heard in 2018 that there were a lot of folks that were working in the 5 VCA counties that adopted then that didn't have all the resources that they need. So I think resources are a big part of this picture. And I think all of us are concerned about what resources will be available at a county level in terms of the elections office, but also to all of you in terms of doing this work. So being really realistic about how you can partner with elections offices, but with each other to have shared messages, to have consistent messaging wherever possible, but at the same time recognizing the uniqueness in certain communities and making messages fit to make sense for those communities. And I think I'll just leave it there because of time, but I would just direct people to some of our research. And thank you for your participation in all of that too.
Yeah, of course. So I have one kind of last question that's coming in, and Harley, go ahead and read it out, and then we'll
Sure. In-language access is important, but literary levels are also vary widely. Can we get materials in more friendly and not so bureaucratic language?
So I'd love for each of you to take a moment. We all talk about digital organizing, everything going virtual. Language is going to be so important now, how we say things, and we talked a little bit about the messaging. So how do your organizations make sure that the messages that you're using resonate, that the language you're using is simple and can be understood by your target audience? And we can go on. I'll go with Kirk, and then Ellie, Kiana, James, and Brittany to conclude us.
All right. So when we're looking for the messaging that resonates with our community members, usually we do focus groups, and we just, we throw questions at them. We do different just exercises to see what resonates better. How does it sound? How does this make you feel when you hear this? What would you need to hear that would, get you up out of your seat? And from there, we're able to really decide what is the best messaging for, for our senior population, or for our people that are just graduating from high school, or folks that are systemically impacted. We want to make sure that we're speaking directly to them so they can't miss it, and let them know that we see you and that we want you to get activated.
Great. And Ellie, a quick response. We're almost running out of time.
Sure. No, I'll just say that I totally agree. I think the in-language information has to be culturally relevant, right? Because I think there's a difference between a Spanish that is very academic versus a Spanish that is widely spoken in the community, right? So for us is, in the absence of, let's say, the county understanding that, our outreach and organizers understand it, right? So I think when we have to use that material, we have to supplement that with our outreach and messaging strategies that would be more culturally relevant and reaching the populations that we actually want to reach.
Great, thank you. And Kiana?
Yeah, I think what's going to be really important over the next few weeks and months is, coming together and deciding what the most critical universal messages are for our communities, and also making sure that they translate nicely into the many language communities that LA County has. And I think also, in response to the question, the LA County Registrar's Office has been really great about creating videos and translating them. They had YouTube videos explaining the changes with VSAP before this last election. So I think using multimedia and sharing these videos, they'll also be a great resource in educating voters ahead of November.
Great, thank you. And James, and then Brittany, and then Mindy, I have one last question for you before we conclude this panel.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to make the point that, we don't always, sort of disregard the government materials, right? That, kind of word to what Ellie and Kirk said, like we still want to use those culturally relevant materials that we develop on our own. But a lot of times the government materials can be kind of useful to give like basic information. And so we'll want to use that to supplement what we create so that we can, direct folks to, the vote centers, for instance, right? Like if there's a list that's already created, why recreate the wheel? We can, again, hand them our sort of flyer, but also hand them that list and keep it moving. And we don't have to necessarily spend money to recreate that. So wanted to make that point as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Brittany, ACLU bridges legalese and speaking to voters. So tips for making language accessible for folks.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of hearing from as many stakeholders as possible. As everybody's already touched on, we rely a lot on research from amazing researchers like Mindy to make sure that we are meeting people where they're at. I think that's incredibly important, that you respond to how people want to vote and how they're able to vote, and how they feel about government and the mail, and all of those things are really important. And it's also important that we partner with other organizations who have more direct connections to the community. And then we have a great communications department as well, which always helps.
Yeah. Great, thank you to all of our panelists. I just wanted to take a moment to first just acknowledge the partnership we've had with the California Civic Engagement Project and USC on this event. And Mindy, I wanted to queue up this because we've heard the importance of messaging and how we say and what we're going to say. So I wanted to give you a chance, if you could, to share about your upcoming research project that we're going to be working on with you. And I think it's important for folks to know that this research will be coming.
Yeah, thanks, Astrid. And since I'm closing it out here, I just want to also thank all the panelists, everybody that participated and joined us today, and thank you for your partnership and your staff, Katie and Lupe were fantastic to work with on all this. So we're doing a number of research projects and surveys trying to get at different kind of components of this puzzle for November. And one is something we're really excited about. It's a partnership with the Future of California Elections. We're doing a survey focused on messaging, trying to better understand what messages might work and in what ways, particularly for underrepresented groups. And it'll be a large enough survey also to drill down in on LA and the differences that we may see in LA. So I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, great. So I want to thank everybody. My colleague Lupe is going to come back on in a minute. You've heard about our Voters Choice LA network. We want to stay connected, so he's going to share a bit about how to do that. I just want to conclude by saying thank you to our expert panelists here for sharing with us. We've heard the importance of trusted messengers, of having messages that are relevant and that resonate with voters, and the importance of partnerships. So please join us and connect with us on our work. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lupe. And thank you, everybody, to our panelists and to everybody that participated today, and of course to my team. So Lupe, go ahead and bring us home.
It was a great webinar. And again, thanks to everyone who participated, who helped, especially some of the unsung heroes behind the scenes, Katie Flaherty and Harley Ham, for jumping in and helping with us. There is a link to a survey to evaluate this webinar. It is in chat. We'll also be receiving it via email. By responding to it, you help us understand how we did with this webinar and how we can improve in future webinars. Upcoming events have been already mentioned. You can definitely connect with us, VCLA, on the screen, via social media, by subscribing to a newsletter, looking for resources and website, or just emailing us directly. The California Civic Engagement Project information is there as well, along with Mindy's Twitter handle. We all try to stay active on social media. I think we do a pretty good job. We also want to thank our funders, the Democracy Fund and the James Irvine Foundation. A special thanks for all our presenters, and especially to Dean Logan and the LA County staff for not only helping with this, for being just excellent partners all year round. The VCLA Steering Committee, certainly, and final thanks to Mindy and USC for the partnership and co-hosting this event. We're very appreciative. We're looking forward to networking and working with all of you in the future to make this next November election safe and accessible for everyone. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good weekend.